Hey guys, welcome to another video. It's been a while since I've done an LED guide, and I think the last one has actually been in written form. I've been updating that one over the years, but I thought it'd be interesting to take you guys along and basically ramble a bit about different LED strips and when some are better to use than others, or what maybe the differences between them are. I'm trying to keep them stuck down, but it's not working. Anyway, of course, as always, I'll be talking about a lot of articles and videos and stuff like that I have on my website, queenled.info. Those will all be linked down in the description, and there you can find my controllers or the LED addressable LED power sheet and my power injection live stream and stuff like that if you want to learn how to do all those things and calculate what wire sizes you need and how many injection points you need and how best to set up a few, all these things concerning addressable LEDs. You'll find that all in the description and on queenled.info. The setup is being driven by two DIG quads, which actually secretly have 5 channels, because, well, we have 10 LED strips over here. We have 5 5-volt LED strips, and then we have 12-volt LED strips. So thus I also have 2 power supplies. It's not really power injected the right way and stuff like that, but I've only enabled 30 LEDs per strip or something like that, so it doesn't need a lot of power. So in this case it's going to be fine. Besides, at full power, we can try that, the controllers are running WLED version 13 beta 7, and they are being synced over the network. This is full power, so that kind of blows out the camera, so that's not going to be very useful. So this is about 1/3 or something like that, and well, they all react a little bit different, but we'll have to make do. Anyway, 5-volt power supply, 12-volt power supply, DIG quads, and well, I'll show you the cable mess in some photo overlays. That's all here on my desk. Now let's introduce the strips first, and then let's talk a little bit about, well, various details of them. So the first one is this top one. That is WS2812B, 5-volt, 30 LEDs per meter with an IP65 coating. Okay. Second one is also WS2812B, but this time 5-volt, also IP65 coating, but this time with 60 LEDs per meter. Then we have SK6812, no coating, so IP30 or whatever you want to call it. And this is special. It's also 5-volt, 60 LEDs per meter, but it's RGB-W instead of just RGB. Okay. Then moving on, there's another special strip, and that is SK6812 with RGB, not RGB-W, but then with 332 LEDs a meter, addressable. It's insane. It looks great. It's hella expensive. Anyway, we'll get to that. Then we have another specialty strip. This is also SK6812, but then WWA. So not RGB, red, green, blue, but it's warm white, cold white, and amber. So 2 whites and, well, an amber, so basically 3 whites. And that is in 90 LEDs a meter. Okay. Then, moving on to 12-volt, we start out with WS2815, 12-volt, 60 LEDs per meter, no coating. And then we have WS2815 with 144 LEDs per meter, still RGB, still 12-volt. Moving on, we go to WS2811, and this, most strips are from BTF, not sponsored. I just, order most of my strips there. This is WS2811, also 12-volt, but 96 LEDs a meter, but because it's WS2811 and 12-volt, it's per 3 addressable. So you have zones here which each have 3 LEDs instead of, addressing them per 1. And this is the normal variant with IP65 coating and a white strip. This is the bright variant with IP65 coating and a white strip. And this is the bright variant with IP65 coating and a black strip. And these three are all 96 LEDs a meter. Now, this kind of inspired the video, but I thought, let's talk about all of them. So, I guess the first thing I'd like to discuss is coating. We have a mix here of a cob LED, which has this kind of coating already on top of it. I'll try and show pictures. And then, LED strips with nothing on there, IP30 or IP20 they often call it, and then IP65 coating, which is encased in epoxy. And there's also an IP67. That is generally when they have the LED strip in a silicone sleeve. I think I have one of those. So that looks like this, where there is a full sleeve around the LED strip, and you also can't stick it down because, the LED strip is inside of here. But that does make it fully watertight. And then there is a last variant, which they often call IP68. And that is basically the same. It's also that silicone sleeve, but then that silicone sleeve is again filled with epoxy, making it fully submersible, and you can stick it down in your pond or whatever like that. So basically, water or IP ratings, you need to get what you need. And for indoors, generally that would be IP2030, so no coating. And especially if they're in a channel with a diffuser on top, that is fine and actually preferred, because if you get IP65, the encoding will be on top of the LEDs, so the LEDs will be less able to radiate their heat. Now, with addressable LEDs, it's most often not that bad. With analog LEDs, they get a lot hotter. So I often still get the IP65 rating. I'll keep doing this whole video, trying to keep them stuck down. But I'll still often get the IP65 coating because that gives a nice anti-dust layer, basically. And sometimes I don't stick them in channel because they don't get too hot anyway. That, my background isn't in the channel either. And then it still gives you a little bit of protection. So, yeah. But especially if you're in a bathroom, or you want to make this on your car, your motorcycle, or any other area that's exposed to the elements or water or water vapor, I'd certainly get IP65 as a minimum, and maybe IP67 if you really need it to last. And as I said, if you're going to submerge it, look for IP68, because that's just basically fully sealed and epoxied in and potted in, and yeah, nothing's going to happen with that. Of course, you still have to, waterproof the connections yourself, but the strip itself will be fully encased. So that is the first detail I wanted to talk about. Now, I already mentioned we have 5-volt strips and we have 12-volt strips. And, the main difference, of course, is the voltage. Now, why would you want 5-volt or 12-volt? Well, 5-volt strip is basically always per single LED addressable, and often also the cheapest, because that's the most that gets sold. Basically, the LED diodes on here, so a package has 3 diodes with red, green, and blue. They operate at around 3 volt or so, it depends on the color and the configuration and stuff like that. And so having 5-volt on the strip means they don't have to drop a lot of that, and they can basically use the native voltage to drive the LEDs. If you ever want to, the downside of that is that a 5-volt strip can use a lot of current, so lots of amps. Like this WS2812B with 60 LEDs a meter. If you wanted to do white, don't recommend that, because RGB white looks horrible. You're much better off with RGB-W, because that uses less power and looks better. But one of these WS2812B 60 LEDs per meter strips will use 13 amps if properly injected. And that means at the front of the strip, the middle of the strip, and the end of the strip, and not too much voltage loss on the injection wires and stuff like that. So 13 amps is a lot, especially if you want to transport that for 5 meters or so. You're going to need some really thick cable to, accomplish that without dropping too much voltage, because, if you drop too much voltage on your transport wires or your power injection wires, what kind of use is it? So I'll probably have that linked somewhere over here, I don't know, where I use a voltage drop calculator to calculate, like, okay, let's say we have a front injection and a back injection, so we want to inject half of that. Well, you can't really, but if you run anything else than white, it uses less power. What kind of cable you'd need for 5 meters? So then the other alternative is 12 volt. Now, that means automatically you have a lot less current, but there's a problem. The LEDs still run at around 3 volts, so they can't run 12 volt directly. Now, there's 2 solutions for that. The most common one, or the best one in that regard, is WS2811, which is that per 3 addressable, as I mentioned. So it spreads that 12 volt over 3 LEDs, then it's close enough to the native voltage the LEDs need, and then it uses some resistors to drop the rest. And you know, it's the most efficient way of dividing the voltage over 3 LEDs and then driving them with the correct voltage again. Now there is one exception, and that is WS2815, these two. Those are 12 volt, but also single addressable. Okay, now you think, hey, that is awesome. It is, and those on my wall are the same. Those are also WS2815s. But it does make things more complicated. Now, you need to have 12 volt on your for your LEDs, and then 5 volt for your LED controller and stuff like that. If you're using a Quinn LED board, especially the pre-assembled ones, those handle that automatically, so no worries there. Otherwise, you have to build a special circuit for that. But even if you have that, WS2815 is a lot less efficient than WS2811 or 5 volt LEDs. The reason is, well, as I mentioned, the diodes in those LED packages expect around 5 volts and not 12 volts. So they need to drop it somehow. So WS2815, the current versions, have an internal current regulator, and they, well, in layman's terms, they basically burn off the voltage. So the downside is efficiency. With a normal LED strip, or 5 volt or WS2811 also, if you set it to 100% red, it'll only light up the red diode, and then you'll have to, give it the power that it needs for that red diode, and it won't use any more. But if you do that with WS2815, suddenly there's no difference between 100% red or 100% white. So where on a normal strip you'd see a lot more power usage for white than you'd see for a single color, with WS2815, if it's 50%, it's at 50%, or if it's at 100%, it will use 100% of the power all the time. Even though you're just seeing one color, it'll be burning off the voltage for the other colors, basically. Now, I mentioned this at the start already. I make a addressable LED power sheet. In that power sheet, you can check all the different LED strips I have here, and also 24 volts variants, which we're not going to talk about today. Those are generally per 6 addressable, but still, for some projects, they might be nice. I have a video about that. You can link it, you can watch that here. But the power sheets will give you great insight into what power the LED strips actually use. Because if you look at what manufacturers state, that is often wrong. And they basically have generic packaging and generic documentation, and they slap that on everything. But in reality, there's a big difference in the power draw of each of these LED strips. So if you're doing calculations for your setup and to design it and stuff like that, make sure to use that real-world power sheet that's on my website. Of course, the links are in the description. That will give you a much better indication of what power you actually should expect and dimension for. Okay? Right. So now we've talked about 5 volt versus 12 volt, and we've talked about IP coatings like a Cobb LED strip, bare IP20 or IP30 LEDs, or IP65 and IP67 and 68. The next thing I'd like to address after talking about that 5 volt and 12 volt is the amount of LEDs per meter. Because, well, as you can see on my board, I have 30 LEDs per meter, 60 LEDs per meter, 332 LEDs per meter, 90 LEDs per meter, 60 LEDs, 144 LEDs per meter, and then 396 LEDs per meter, but per 3 addressable. So that's a lot of different varieties. And it'll kind of depend on the project you're doing. If you're doing something that has the LEDs in direct sight, basically like you're looking at now, I'd highly recommend at least 60 LEDs per meter, but 144 LEDs per meter makes the animations look a lot nicer. So if they're in sight, maybe consider doing that. But if you've got the money, this 332 LEDs per meter, it's in its own league. How it looks, but also price-wise. So basically that is if it's in direct sight. Now, if it isn't in direct sight or you're going to diffuse it anyway, and I have a live stream about diffusers and testing those and stuff like that, you can do with less LEDs per meter, because the downside is the more LEDs you have per meter, the higher the power usage will be. So a 144 LED per meter strip will use, well, basically more than twice as much as a 60 LEDs per meter strip if properly injected, and especially at 5 volt. That can be a problem with this many LEDs. You'll basically have to inject every 1 to 2 meters instead of about every 5 meters with a 60 LED per meter strip. So if they're not in direct sight, I'd often just recommend 60 LEDs per meter. But especially for larger projects, you might even want to go down to 30 LEDs per meter or to one of the special strips. But let's talk about the 30 LEDs per meter first. The reason is that, well, this uses half the power of this, so it also requires half the injection points of this one. So that will make doing large-scale projects a lot easier because it requires less injection and the current is a lot lower. Now you can go, okay, I can do 30 LEDs per meter 5 volt, then I can do 60 LEDs per meter 12 volt. Yes, but not WS2815 because it's less efficient. So then you get to WS2811, but those are per 3 addressable. So now that is an issue. But there might be some compromises there. If you look at this 30 LEDs per meter, and I need to select a different effect real quick. If you look at these strips, this is 30 LEDs per meter 5 volt, WS2812B. And these are all WS2811 96 LEDs per meter, but with the downside of being per 3 addressable. But 96 divided by 3 is 32. So this 5 volt 30 LED per meter strip has about the same zones per meter as this 96 LEDs per meter strip. But it does have 3 LEDs in the same amount of space as this single LED in that amount of space. So especially from afar, this 96 LEDs per meter strip will look a lot nicer or more even, especially with a diffuser or if you're bouncing it on a wall or something like that, than the 30 LEDs per meter strip. And I find it a very good compromise between either needing 60 LEDs per meter 5 volt, which is a mess to cable. I'd often opt for 12 volt 96 LEDs per meter WS2811 for larger and further away scale projects, because it'll look almost as nice, but it's just a lot easier to deal with. Because, well, why don't we use 332 LEDs per meter everywhere, because that looks absolutely the best? Well, it comes with its own inherent downsides, but we'll discuss that later in the video when we talk about the specialty strip. So LEDs per meter, it's very hard to just say use this or use that, because it'll depend very much on your project. If it's a short to medium project, 60 LEDs per meter at 5 volt WS2812B is the cheapest stuff out there. Maybe SK6812 if you also want white. Talk about that in a minute. But yeah, that is definitely the easiest to use and the cheapest to use. But once you start going to medium to long projects, I'd really consider going to 12 volt. If it's a medium project, the WS2815 can be a great alternative, except if you're running on battery, because it's a lot less efficient. And then I'd step up to the WS2811, because, well, that gives you basically the same amount of LEDs, but spaced closer together, but less addressable zone, and it's a good compromise strip for doing longer projects. And especially if you're bouncing it off a wall or if it's diffused, it looks excellent. And it has a neat little trick which the other LED strips can't match, but we'll talk about that in a minute. I've changed the effect again. So to reiterate, we talked about 5 volt versus 12 volt and also what that does in regards to current and power injection a little bit, but I have a power injection live stream which will explain that a lot better. And there's ways around 5 volt versus 12 volt and 24 volt. For instance, I did a whole video series on 24 volt distribution networks and I'm using a 5 volt buck converter near the strip. That way you can use 24 volt for your distribution wires, and you can easily go 10 meters and use a small wire gauge and then just transform it back to 5 volt there, giving you a lot less loss on the cable because, well, it was 24 volt while it traveled over there. Yeah, so there's ways around that, but again, there's lots of articles on the website and linked in the description about that. So 5 volt versus 12 volt, we talked about the IP coding. And, well, tied to the 5 volt and 12 volt discussion, we talked about LEDs per meter, where you might want 30 or 60 or 90 or 144 or 96 LEDs per meter, depending on your project, or 332, I mean, come on. And if your LEDs will be inside or behind a diffuser or bounced off a wall or something like that. The next thing, I guess, we'll discuss specialty strips. And we'll start with this guy, because this is WS2812B, and this is SK6812 RGB-W. So next to a red, green, and blue diode per LED, it also has a white diode. And I'm going to shut everything off and see if I can show you that specific. Okay, so now we only have that RGB-W strip left. And, you know, it can do red, it can do green, and it can do blue. That's no problem. But it can also do white. And if you pay very close attention, you'll see that it has a bigger white diode. And let's go to white mode. And let's turn off the colors, but turn on the white channel. And now you can see, maybe I should turn it down a little bit. Yeah, I'm not sure how good it'll show up on camera, but you can see that it has a little white diode next to the RGB diodes. Now, if you want anything with white, get RGB-W, because RGB white is absolutely horrible. Because, as I showed you earlier, it's made out of 3 diodes, RGB, but they're all spaced slightly different. All shadows the light casts upon will have 3 colored, slightly offset shadows, which really looks horrible. Now, RGB-W still isn't the savior of white light. There is something called CRI, the Color Rendering Index, and as white light goes, this is still quite low quality white light. There is no high CRI addressable LED strip that I know of, and well, I have a lot of strip. I wish there was, but high CRI, so high quality or full spectrum white LED light is still the domain of analog LEDs, and well, we're not discussing those today. So, bad quality white light is still a lot better than RGB white combined light, basically. So if you want to be able to do white light as an accent, and maybe you can mix it a little bit. Let me you know, with a little color here, so we can add a bit of red, for instance. I can add a bit of more red to show you, and we can change the appearance of the light. So we can add a little bit of blue, or we can add a bit of white, and we can add more, or blue and white. And so you can mix it and make the white light different colors. That will not affect the spectrum of the light. So it'll still be low quality light, not suitable for video lighting or in your kitchen or to light your worktops or even your bench tops and stuff like that. I really would not recommend it as any form of primary lighting. It's good for secondary lighting and also having a, well, better white than RGB white. And it can certainly be used for some stuff, but I wouldn't recommend it for primary or living space or especially kitchen or anything critical, because skin tones will look horrible, your food will look disgusting, and it's just, it's not great. It's much better than RGB white. It's still not great, right? So that is RGB-W. You can get RGB-W in 5 volt, 12 volt, and 24 volt. Of course, per 1, per 3, and per 6 addressable. And the main chipsets that are known for it are SK6812 and TM1814. That's a bit of a new one, but the newest WLED in my controllers support that just fine, and I've been testing with it, and that works great. Okay, let's move on to the next specialty strip. So we're moving from SK6812 RGB-W to SK6812 WWA. This is also a 5 volt strip. In this case, it's 90 LEDs per meter, because I used it in a project where they would be inside, actually in my PC case. Did a whole video about that too. So WWA differs that it doesn't have red, green, and blue, but warm white, cold white, and amber. Now, if in WLED we set the color to red, we see that we now have an amber or gold colorish LED, which, you know, gives a really nice effect. And if we then go to blue, we see that we get a warm white around 3000 Kelvin light. And if we set it to green, we see that we get a cold white. Now, addressable LED wise, this is the best white you'll find. I, however, did some tests using my spectrometer, and it's still very low quality light, missing a lot of a spectrum like R9 for your skin colors and stuff like that. But it'll certainly look a lot better than RGB white, and it's even better than RGB-W in quality. It's just not great yet. But as you can see here, I used this strip, and that's why I got them in 90 LEDs per meter in my PC case build, because I wanted addressable lighting in there, but I didn't want RGB puke at the time. I might be changing that at some point. We'll talk about maybe which strip I'd like to use in there later. But yeah, if you have projects where you don't want RGB, but you think, okay, maybe this amber gold color mixed together with, let's do a bit of everything. I need a different effect. Hold on. Right, here's a little different effect. Maybe you think, okay, the warm white, cool white, and amber effect suits me much better than RGB. And it basically just works like normal in WLED. It doesn't understand that it's different colors. But as I explained with the red, green, and blue, those are mapped to the different LED diodes. So, better white light, still not great, but absolutely if you need addressable white light, these are pretty cool. Okay, moving on to the next strip, and that is this guy. Let's set it to a WLED orange, and let's set it to the Paletti effect, because this strip is insane. This is one of the most recent developments. I did a whole video about it too, but it has 332 addressable cob LEDs inside. You can still cut it to length. I mean, I connected the wires to this one myself because I use it in my Heartlight project. I'll have a video link here too, or at least in the description. But if you want seamlessly looking LEDs and you basically don't want to be able to differentiate the individual LEDs, it doesn't get much better than this. And that's why I already hinted it. If I ever redo my PC case with RGB lighting, it'll get this stuff. Let me try and turn it down as much as I can. to see if you can see the individual. Yeah, now you can kind of see the individual LEDs. If you turn it down a lot, you can still see it. It has its own diffuser kind of in the cob material, but even then, on very, very low settings, and I basically, yeah, okay, this is the lowest I can go. But then you can't really run it that low, because the downside of running lower brightness is that you also lower the steps that the LEDs can take. Kind of side to here. People often say, I'll just run 25% or 30% power limited. Okay, sure, you can do that, but it has an inherent downside, because each LED or diode has 255 levels. So you have 255 levels for red, 255 levels for green, and 255 levels for blue. And combining all of those, you get those 16 million colors, etc. But now let's say you limit the LED to half. Now you only have 128 values per color. Or, as I just, turned down the slider as much as I could go, now they basically only have 1 or 2 colors per color, so it looks really bland and not mixed anymore and really weird. So keep that in mind. If you're designing a setup where you're going to run at 20%, everything will start to look more choppy, because you suddenly don't have 255 levels of brightness for a certain color anymore, but you only have 32 or 16, which, well, as I said, will make things a lot choppier than if you did have them. There is some strip that can do that better, like APA 102 or HD 107S or HD 108 nowadays. Those are data and clock line LED strip. Those work a little bit different than all of these, which are clockless LED strip. But I wasn't going to talk about those today. So let's turn this up a little bit again, because this stuff looks absolutely excellent. I mean, I can't really even convey how awesome this looks. And if you look at certain effects and how it conveys the animations, let me activate all of them again. Right. So now all of the LED strips are on the same color, doing the same pattern. This is noise 3 in WLED. And, well, you can easily see that the definition of the animations and stuff like that is much, much better on this 332 LED per meter strip, and even on this 144 LED per meter strip, than it is on the 96 LEDs per meter per 3 addressable, or the 30 or the 60 even. So if you have the strips in direct sight, 144 LEDs per meter certainly makes it look more pretty. And, well, this strip is just insane, but you'll be paying about $30 per meter, or per 3 feet. Yeah, so that's insane. And then there's a new problem, which I haven't even talked about in this video yet. Addressable LED strip, especially clockless variants like this, have a limit of the amount of LEDs you can use on a single channel. That is around 600. Now, if you're running 60 LEDs per meter, or the advised limit, to stay within the frame rate of WLED, basically, there's an article linked in the description. You can run 10 meters of this strip, which is 60 LEDs per meter, or you can run 2 meters of this strip before you need a new data channel to basically feed it new data to keep everything from becoming really choppy. Yeah, so specialty strip, absolutely awesome if you can afford it. And if it has to be in direct sight, well, I definitely get this stuff, because I've never seen anything better. But yeah, there is another specialty strip that I'd like to discuss, and that is the WS2811. And then this is the normal variant, and then we have 2 of the bright variant, each in 96 LEDs per meter. As we talked about earlier, 96 LEDs per meter is about the same amount of zones as 30 LEDs per meter, and this is 5 volt and this is 12 volt, but still, because it's 12 volt, it's easier to power inject and stuff like that than the 30 LEDs per meter, and certainly than the 60 LEDs per meter, because you can feed a 5 meter roll of 96 LEDs per meter 12 volt strip from a single side, and that's going to be fine for normal effects and stuff like that. Where with 5 volt 60 LEDs per meter, you'd at least have to inject both sides for that. So yeah, it has its advantages. Now, normal variant versus bright variant. One of the unique things of WS2811 is that it's an external chip. As you can clearly see, there's chips here that are the LED driver packages. So for all these LEDs, so the WS2812B, the SK6812, and even these, they all have integrated, you can basically see this black dot on here, integrated ICs which drive the LED package in which they're encased. With WS2811, those are external. And that opens up some new opportunities. For instance, by example, the difference between the normal variant and the bright variant is that the LED packages that they put on the strip are of much better quality than on the normal variant. So some colors, and it doesn't really show up that well on camera, but the normal variant looks really bland and bad, and they basically have horrible quality LED packages, where the bright variant uses really awesome quality LED packages, and the reds and the greens and the blues look so much more vibrant, and I think they look best out of all of these strips. It's also kind of why I'm partial to them, because they can take higher quality LED packages where they can't with these, because these basically always are the same. If you have a WS2812B LED, it doesn't matter from which vendor it is. If it's a genuine WS2812B, it'll always have the same LEDs, where with WS2811, you can couple any quality or type or whatever LED you'd like. So that makes them very unique, and the bright variant is indeed brighter, and this is definitely the brightest strip between all of these. I guess I'll turn it up to max brightness. These really shine a lot of light. I mean, yeah. So again, depending on your project, if you can use these or not, really do consider maybe getting those WS2811 bright variants. And there is different variants on the market. A UCS 1903 is a competing chip with the WS2811, and you can configure strips differently with these chips and resistors and stuff like that. If you use a heavier copper strip, which the bright also have, they have more copper in the strip to transfer the power better and stuff like that. That's also why they're a bit more expensive, but it pays off in the end by having to power inject less and get better LEDs. But this bright variant certainly isn't the brightest WS2811 you could configure out on the market, but they are the most easy available from a fairly reputable, from a fairly well-known vendor, which, will replace the strip if it doesn't work or there's any other problems. So let me turn this down again because I'm going blind. In the future, we'll be doing more projects with this WS2811 96 LEDs per meter, because I just think it's excellent as long as you're not looking directly at the LEDs. And we're going to be doing a project in our attic where I did an LED project before, but different spot, where we're going to, use addressable LEDs that are basically pointed towards a white wall, where the difference between 60 LEDs per meter and 96 LEDs per meter but per 3 addressable kind of falls away, and these things look so awesome. The colors are just so vibrant, I can't explain the difference. It's not like these are bad, these are just better. So yeah, now that was a lot of theory. While I'm still rambling around, let's, do a different effect, I guess. Twinkle Fox, there we go. Those are kind of the main things I wanted to explain about selecting an LED strip for your project. Now I'm going to repeat myself. This was done using Quinn LED DIG quad controllers. Those have 5 channels in total. They can be bought pre-assembled, so You can just buy one, screw in the LED leads, and you're done. You can join the Wi-Fi network and configure them. No programming, no soldering or anything like that necessary, unless your project becomes bigger. Then those things might be necessary, but I can't really solve that in my controller. So if you're getting into addressable LEDs, that might be a really great, easy step for you. And as I mentioned, there's lots of great info on QuinLED.info. I try to update my list with tools, and with for the LED controllers, I continually update those to make them better. And there's lots of articles on there. Also a written LED guide for selecting your LED strip. Now I hope this has shown you some more options for LED strip that you can use. That maybe you didn't know about, like the 332 LEDs per meter, or when to go for RGBW and when not to. I didn't really highlight that in my RGBW piece, so I'll do that now. One thing about the coding, and you can kind of see that on the camera, if you compare this strip with this one, these are both 60 LEDs per meter, but these look much wider than these. That is because the light kind of spreads around in the epoxy layer, giving them a more diffused look. And that can be desirable or not. It can also be a downside, because with SK6812, if the blue diode activates, the phosphor of the white diode likely will also start to glow. So in that case, the blue vibrancy of SK6812 RGBW will be less than of an RGB variant. So kind of keep that in mind. Here you don't really see that effect, because in the package itself it's separated well enough, but if the epoxy layer is on there, it does bleed through. So that is something to take into account. Another thing about LED strips is the color. You can see I have white strips and I have black strips. Basically, it comes down to, again, just like with the coding, if you want good definition per LED, get a black strip because it doesn't reflect the light. And if you want a more even spread, and basically you want it to, become a single diffused line, getting a white strip is better, because a single diode, as you can especially see here, spreads its light much further than on here, where it's very that's for the epoxy, sorry, then on here where it's very individual. So if you really want that individual look, get a black strip, and if you want the blended look more, get a white strip and maybe epoxy coating to spread it even more. Right? Hope that makes sense. So when not to use RGBW, there is downsides to a lot of things. As I mentioned, the 332 LEDs per meter has the downside of requiring lots of data channels for very little amount of distance. And then again, you can use the 96 LEDs per meter for long distance projects, where you can also use 12 volts, so it's much easier to cable, but it's, per 3 addressable, and that's going to be visible up close. So lots of different options for different projects. Let me know down in the comments if I showed you something new or explained it a different way that you understood better, or maybe you didn't understand something and you'd like a better explanation. If you're building your own LED setup, I have a Discord server. There's about, 7,000 people there now, and we regularly discuss everything LEDs and setups and stuff like that. We won't design the setup for you. That's what the articles and stuff like that are for. But once you've kind of figured out or thought of a way, and maybe a drawing in paint or whatever, of what you think your setup should look like, and you've calculated the cables using the power injection live stream and the addressable power sheets and stuff like that, come over there and we'll talk to you about your setup and maybe give you tips and hints and pointers and stuff like that to make it better or easier to cable. And we like to help out, but we're not a design my setup service. Basically, that's what all these videos are for, and articles. So yeah, I'll keep playing with LEDs. There's going to be other content too, like I promised, but I just love blinking lights. Right. I can't say it enough. Check out the guides in the description and leave a comment if you learned something or if you have a different question. And I'll see you guys in another video. Bye-bye.